What's up gamers, Dreamcastguy here, talking today about Resident Evil leaks, because some new stuff has just come out that is very, very interesting. Now I'm just gonna say this once, because we've gotten like 4,000 new subscribers this week. I am a Resident Evil mega fan. I make it a point to try and beat the games again and again. Sometimes I even do speedruns. I like to try and find all the collectibles, but most importantly, I just like to try and find every piece of plot and story. I think that the Resident Evil universe is incredibly fun, and I'm always curious about those leaks whenever there's the next big project that's about to maybe come out, which is how I've stumbled upon this person named Dusk Golem. Now, Dusk Golem is a Twitter leaker, and he has some confirmed sources deep inside of Capcom. I mean, this guy has managed to reveal some very major stuff way before he was supposed to. And one of the things he's been talking a lot about is inside the creation of the next Resident Evils. Now, the way we know he's correct is because he said pretty much every single detail about Resident Evil 8 he already knows. He talked about the werewolves before they were revealed, the location, the fact that Chris Redfield is hunting us down. All of this information is flat out been talked about by Dusk Golem months before it was public. So now I've been paying some extra close attention to everything he says, and lately he's been saying a lot about a Resident Evil 4 remake. Now I'm a little bit mixed on this, mostly because I am absolutely in love with this Resident Evil Code Veronica. I think that Code Veronica is definitely one of the most unique of the classic Resident Evils. Yes, it's a little bit more clunky, it's a little bit more obsessively focused on pointless puzzle solving, but to me, these are such gems. But unfortunately, we can now definitely see that they are moving on. They're going to be skipping straight to Resident Evil 4. So tonight, I'm recording this in the middle of the night because I'm a crazy person. There have been a bunch of people who have been talking to Dusk Golem about some of the shortcomings of the Resident Evil 3 remake. Because let's face it, as fun as that game was and as good as the graphics were, the main drawback was that the game was short. It had a lot of cut content. And even now, months later, people are talking about how much was missing from an otherwise great experience. So somebody named Ramoe Nick tweeted at him and said this: after Resident Evil 3 remake, many people are afraid of all the potential cuts and changes. Aside from the archaic controls, Resident Evil 4 is a perfect action game that, despite being 16 to 20 hours, doesn't feel long because it's continuously adding in new combat scenarios. It'll be hard for the Resident Evil 4 remake to achieve that. Now, I definitely agree with this guy, but Dusk Golem, he decided to reply to this and fire off a series of very interesting tweets that actually give us a pretty deep dive look into what will probably be the Resident Evil 4 remake. While I get the concern, I actually wouldn't take the Resident Evil 3 remake as much of a sign of anything. For one, obviously Capcom would have heard the feedback for now, but more so, the same teams aren't behind it. So he's just to now confirm that a totally different group from any of the other remakes is now working on the Resident Evil 4 remake, which means that clearly Capcom is trying to give them a longer time frame. One of the main speculations is the fact that Resident Evil 3 remake was tiny because they just flat out had a deadline. The Resident Evil 2 remake could be big and expansive and have additional boss fights because they had pretty much years to just make that one game, whereas the Resident Evil 3 remake, they had to get it done before they revealed Resident Evil 8. They had to put that game out. Now, the fact that they're working on this differently, the fact that they're going to be doing this now, makes me think that they're trying to really push Resident Evil 4 to be the next big giant remake that wants to get all the attention. I also know this next statement will infuriate some, but also Resident Evil 4 Remake is simply a bigger project. In the first 5 Resident Evil games, Resident Evil 3 was the least important. Yes, unfortunately, it's confirmed that it was just a tiny spin-off. The Resident Evil 1 is the original, Resident Evil 2 is the fan favorite, Resident Evil 4 was one of the top-rated games of all time, and Resident Evil 5 one of the top-selling. As one of their crown jewels, the remake being a bigger project was always the case. Now, all of that makes sense. It's clearly showing that Capcom is definitely focused on making sure that this remake is as big and crazy and impressive as possible to live up to the understandable hype around it. Now this next one here, this is where things start to get incredibly crazy, and to be honest, this is the tweet right here that made me make this video. To be honest, Resident Evil 4 doesn't need a remake for anyone who's playing it for a long time, but it's not attractive for newcomers, people who got involved with the remake 2 and 3. So this person is basically saying that we still love the game, but I understand it needing a refresh. Resident Evil 4 Remake is going to be controversial, but yes, there is a creative and business sense to why to remake it. It's one of my favorite games ever, but after 15 years later, you do find a lot of people recently getting into the series, playing Resident Evil 4, and not as having as easy of a time to get into it. Now, I'll fully admit that as much as I love Resident Evil 4, and as much as I can definitely adapt to the controls and the funky inventory system, I definitely realize that it's not the most understanding to current gen players. To change the issues newcomers or modern players have with the game means you have to change elements of the original game was designed around, primarily how it controls. But as the original game was built around those controls, a remake reimagining goal would be design the game around the new controls as tightly and capture the same pacing. Now what he's saying here in a more elaborate sense is that by trying to make the game have sharper controls, they're going to need it to have it like faster enemies or bigger foes to make sure that it's still just as frightening and kind of claustrophobic as the original Resident Evil 4 was. Many who already love the game will disagree, but I do think that there's something that can be gained by remaking the game. Execution is where to see if they can nail it or not. I do think that there's a way Resident Evil 4 could be improved. The question is if the teams are the right one for the job. Now that's certainly mysterious, but the fact that he's saying that it could be controversial because they're going to have to overhaul so many systems of it, that to me is definitely juicy. Now let's move on to this. Here's where he decided to do these last two tweet things, and both of them he calls his last. But they're both definitely the craziest information because after he sent them out, he straight up said that he's shutting up. This is the last Resident Evil 4 question I'll answer for a while. I know more than most about the Resident Evil 4 remake right now, but there's a lot I don't know at this point in time, and the things I do know mostly are best to be seen than talked about literally a year or so before the game's announcement. So he's saying that this game is a long way off from even getting the trailer. Now here he goes. Yes, the story is an area they're focusing on expanding greatly. Not in the way you described though, because the person here is talking about how they might switch around certain characters, like instead of the president's daughter Ashley getting kidnapped, maybe Sherry Birkin from Resident Evil 2. So he's flat out saying the story is going to be different, but not so different that they're actually trying to change the timeline. I'm definitely happy about that. I mean, I don't mind some tweaks, some additions, but I'm glad that they're not trying to make the Resident Evil 3 remake completely break the timeline. I guess in one random thing I can toss out there is, as an example, have you ever thought about what Dr. Salvatore's deal was in Resident Evil 4? No? Well, be prepared to be intrigued. Now, if you're a Resident Evil fanatic like I am, this is completely mind-blowing because the Dr. Salvatore is a chainsaw guy. He's actually the dude you see that's chasing you around. This dude has a name. Now, most of us just call him the chainsaw guy, but there's some sort of hidden lore about him. Maybe he's one of the initial people that found Las Plagas. Maybe he's one of the people who chose to spread it. Maybe there's more to him and to why he's able to take so much damage compared to the typical Ganados. If we get some actual backstory, some real rooted lore, imagine if we get a chance to talk to one of these infected in a way that wasn't in the original experience. That would be so epic, and to me, as a lore nut, I would that right there is completely worth the price with nothing else. So this is the final tweet, and definitely the one that he's trying to almost cover up as soon as he puts it out here. But this person asked about a more technical design question, which is that a lot of us realize that Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3, they were much more slow and methodical. They were what people called save one bullet horror. The idea behind them was that you're stuck in a giant creepy mansion and there's big spooky stuff all over the place and you have to be careful with every single thing. Whereas Resident Evil 4, they gave you shotguns and rocket launchers and lots of ammunition. Resident Evil 4 Remake was definitely, or Resident Evil 4 Original was much more about the thrills and kills. And what Dusk Golem says here to that is very, very deliberate in my opinion, which is that first he says this is the last time he's going to talk about it for a couple months, but what he says is that Resident Evil 4 back in the day came out and revolutionized the series and the gaming landscape as a whole, making it play like Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 Remake, or even like the originals, wouldn't achieve what the original Resident Evil 4 accomplished. That's all I'm going to say for now. Be ready to sit on this one for like a year into the reveal. Now, to me, that is one of those giant non-statements. He is very clearly putting up a giant sign that says, this is enough. And what I'm reading into this is the fact that they're going to try and add a ton of new stuff into the Resident Evil 4 remake that didn't exist in the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake, which means maybe more dodging, maybe some sort of crafting system, maybe some extra elements to make it where the AI is more adaptive. The only answer to this is very clearly that they want the Resident Evil 4 remake to be the next step in the same way that Resident Evil 4 was back in the day. I am 100% on board with this. I think it is incredibly cool, and I'm definitely going to be buying it day one whenever this comes out, which unfortunately will very likely be 2022. But what do you think? Oh god, my camera just died as I was filming this. Well, either way, thanks so much for watching, gamers. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. My camera always records for exactly 14 minutes and 33 seconds, and it shuts itself off every freaking time. I wish I could get it to stop doing that. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.